Well, welcome everybody. This is I think our third conversation circle for the African Collaboration Network for Design Thinking, which is hosted and facilitated by the Hasso-Plattner D School Africa in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town. And we're very excited today to have everyone joining, whether you're here live or watching the recording. And today, well, firstly, let me just give you a little bit of background about the network. This is an open, growing ecosystem of organizations who have in common that we are building capacity and knowledge in design thinking in the African context. And this all began in October 2022, and as I said, facilitated by the D School Africa. And the purpose of the network is to convene and nurture an African network and community of practice of like-minded institutions involved in learning and development, with a focus on design thinking in an African context. The purpose being to collaborate in order to share ideas and resources, to mobilize, build, and disseminate knowledge, and build capacity in design thinking on the continent that is responsive to local contexts, while building, while contributing leadership and innovation in the design thinking field from a global South perspective. So with that intention, these conversation circles is one way in which we build that community and engage with each other. Now, today, we are talking about empathy, which is so foundational to design thinking, right? It's a mindset, how a designer puts themselves in the shoes of a user and gets to really understand them. It is also the first stage in the process, which is often depicted in different ways, but empathizing or understanding is one of the first parts of that process. And then it's also, there's tools that like empathy maps that helps you map out and understand your user. So lots of tools around the empathy point. And then to some, like as Ines Oliveira has said, that empathy is not only these isolated parts, but actually central to the whole process. And what makes design thinking a human-centered approach. So if this is such an important part, we must ask how well we have honed these skills and understood what empathy means. And then in particular, in an African context, let's unpack today a bit more about what that means when working in cross-cultural situations. And as Katherine and Sasha are going to tell us about, also not only empathizing with others, but empathizing with yourself in order to understand your positionality in relation to others. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sasha and Katherine after that introduction, and let them take it further.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jenny, and thanks very much for the opportunity to be able to share some of our thoughts on this platform. I'm really excited about that. I think Sasha and I will just start with a very brief introduction to ourselves, and then Sasha will take off from her perspective the work that she's doing up in Ghana. So first, just to say, my name is Katherine Train, and I started working with empathy about 20 years ago, and that was mainly in a patient-centric or human-centric approach in social services and healthcare. I partnered up about 9 years ago with a person who's been studying empathy for many, many years in Europe. And together we co-developed what we call Empathic Intervision and integrative empathy, where we integrate different approaches to empathy into mainly mindset and practice. And then about 8 years ago, I joined Robert Bloom, who's with the Design Thinkers Academy. And we looked at how these practices of empathy can be integrated into the design thinking process. That has developed over those many years. And at the moment, we train for empathy in design thinking, partially, but also many other practices. And that's with universities, non-governmental organizations, and in consultancies and design agencies. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm based in Cape Town, for those of you who don't know. And over to Sasha.
Awesome. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm glad to see familiar faces in here. So really, I'm a designer, a design researcher based in Ghana. I've been working with research for about 3 years now, and that's where I was introduced to the concept of empathy. And on the concept of self-empathy, I only got to experience this from the conference that we had with the D School. That's from Catherine's presentation there. And from that conversation that we had, it got me really thinking about what do I think about empathy and how do I practice that within my context in Ghana. So I would be sharing more about my context, working with empathy and design thinking within Ghana as a design thinking practitioner. And Catherine will also share from her perspective as well. Then, yeah, and then we'll have like an interactive session right at the end as well. So maybe moving on to the next slide. Yes, so yeah, the next slide as well, because I already shared this. Yeah. So I just want to sort of lead the conversation with saying that sort of our interpretation of the world is greatly shaped by our backgrounds, our cultures, our experiences, our environment, and therefore, even in our careers, we sort of bring these experiences within our careers as well. So even like looking at the design thinking practice as well, all these experiences sort of follow us within our careers. And these experiences sometimes serve as a filter for how we sort of perceive the world around us. And therefore, as long as we are humans and we're living, we're constantly going to filter the world around us, which can either be positive or a negative bias. But when we think about the concept of empathy, it really allows us to see other people in their perspective, sort of put ours aside and think of other people in their perspective, which is sort of really core to our practice as design thinking practitioners. And this has made this talk like even more relevant because we're looking on the topic of empathy and design thinking through the African perspective, trying to really unpack what does empathy really mean to us as Africans and its impact on design thinking practice on the continent. So as I said before, I'll be sharing my experience working with empathy through the next slide. I have two lenses that I want to look at empathy from on the next slide. So first of all, I want to look at empathy through Ghanaian local languages, the previous slide. So I would like to look, exactly, thank you. So I'd like to look at empathy through two different lenses, that is Ghanaian local languages, and also through another lens that is quite dear to my heart, being an eldest daughter in a Ghanaian home. On the next slide, I want to go deeper into examining empathy from the Ghanaian local languages here. So while I was preparing for this talk, I was really questioning myself to try and translate, like when I think about empathy, how do I sort of translate it into my local language? Because sometimes I feel like I sort of connect more with my language and I can better understand what it means than when it's in English, right? So I was really trying to understand, can I sort of have like a translation of empathy in the Ghanaian local languages? I tried my best. I couldn't really find like a direct translation. So I did the needful. I spoke to a couple of my friends who are from different ethnic groups, did a bit of research, called a bit of like some linguist people that I know. I also did some research on Google Translates, right? Just to try and piece out, like, can I get like a direct translation from this? And from my sort of research, I couldn't really get like a direct translation, but I couldn't really get a direct translation, but I could get some different interpretations of empathy within different languages. So over here, I was able to get two languages, that is Akan and Ewe. And in those two languages, we have Ehumobro and Dominio. And these two languages sort of translates vaguely into compassion, right? In different contexts. But this has a twist, and I want to focus in on one language on the next slide, which is my language, the Chi language. And over here, it sort of translates to ehumobro, which sort of means compassion, but has an undertone, it's a very silent undertone of responsibility and care for another person, right? So over here, you're sort of stepping into the shoes of somebody, you're staying in those shoes, ensuring that they are comfortable for the time being that you are there with them. And sometimes you sort of forget to even put back your own shoes as well. As compared to our interpretation of empathy as design thinking practitioners, where we sort of say, you need to step into the shoes of someone, understand them from their perspective. But then at the end of the day, you would go back and pick your shoes and move on. That's after you've completed the research, you've sort of done the needful, you've gotten all the information as well. You can sort of take a step back, right? Because you're not living in that context. And in some situations when we're researching in very sensitive topics such as like maybe abuse, rape, molestation, finance is a very big topic on the African continent. We sort of go in with a standpoint of empathy. We want to empathize, want to look at things from their point of view, sort of. Get the information, step back, right back out of it without really nursing these wounds that we sort of open with the conversations that we've started, right? So, and a good example would be, oh
dear.
I think we might have lost Sasha.
Oh dear. Let
Ah.
us, yeah, maybe
I
perhaps
wonder-
she say they've had troubles. Do you want to maybe go to yours and then come back to Sasha if we have time?
Yes, I think that's a good idea, Jenny. So maybe
Sasha?
just to pick up, Sasha's still there, but we're not hearing her. It was quite interesting when Sasha and I spoke together about doing this together, in that I'm also an oldest daughter, and it was actually quite remarkable, me being right in the south of Africa and her being right further up, the similarities that we experienced through our upbringing, and how that impacted our kind of visions or our experiences of empathy. So I'm going to pick up there, and Jenny, maybe if you wouldn't mind passing through onto my slides. So what I'd like to share about is, so Jenny in the introduction spoke about the importance of empathy in design thinking and how absolutely central it potentially is. And I really like what Inez does with her diagram, where she shows the empathy in the center of all the rest of the different elements of design thinking, because from my view, there is a direction or a focus in design thinking, which is really centered on what empathy is all about. And so what I'd like to do is speak through a few elements that we work with in integrative empathy. So we speak about empathy as potentially a mindset and also a particular phase in the design thinking process. And yet what we find is that how do you convert that mindset, the mindset of empathy, into actually a thing to do? So how do we convert it into a skill or set of skills and a practice? Jenny, if you go to the next slide. And this is very much with the core focus of design thinking, where we're trying to identify deeper needs. And unfortunately, those deeper needs never come neatly packaged. Usually a user or even people in a team don't necessarily know what those deeper needs are. And so what empathy is about is it's about creating a space that one, if you go to the next slide, that one is able to encourage a person to go deeper into their experience in order that you are able to help that person to make sense and reveal those deeper needs, and at the same time to have an understanding of those needs. We very often speak in empathy about stepping into the shoes of another person, but when we step into the shoes of another person, we come, as Sasha was speaking about, with our own context, our own lenses, our own preconceptions about the world. And what we notice very much on the African continent, but I think really universally, is that those lenses are so deeply entrenched that very often one is, what might be the context of the other person, you're not even aware of it as a possibility. And so it's really important that one is working with empathy with a deep sense of inquiry and inquisitiveness and curiosity, but also that one is very familiar with what one's own lenses are in order that you can make sense of the other person's context, deeper needs, whatever it might be. So we look very much at reactions that we might have to other people, to their views, to their contexts that are very unfamiliar to ourselves, and then how we project our own experience and our own understanding of the world onto those people. So context, culture, and also personal history are very important. So you see in the overlap between these two, you know, yourself as the yellow empathizer and the user that you're empathizing with, there's this whole murky area in the middle where we tend to potentially react and project our own lenses on the people. Jenny, next slide, please. So what we do is in integrative empathy, we have 5 different elements of empathy, which are all quite unique and specific elements, but also with a skill base that one can very particularly apply. So the first one is what is referred to kinesthetic empathy. And this is all about really the non-verbal element of communication that happens between people. What's interesting about it is that it's usually automatic and unconscious. So we're usually not aware of what's going on in this non-verbal element. So we speak about embodied experience. You know, what is that internal embodied experience that we are communicating, but subliminally in a sense? There are various things that one can become more aware of in oneself in order to work with kinesthetic empathy. So there's mirroring, there's a lot of research about mirror neurons and how we, you know, how this works in our understanding of other people. There's also physiological linkage. So we automatically mimic each other's breathing, for example. And in this way, we can, on the one hand, understand somebody else better, but also be more aware of how we come across to other people. In design thinking, one uses the kinesthetic empathy in creating rapport. So in interviews, creating trust. Also very important in teams. So with the teams that you're working with. Also to notice and understand nonverbal cues. So this is useful in interviews, observation, observing people, even in immersions, if you're immersing yourself in an experience, to become more aware of your own bodily responses so that you can get a deeper understanding of the situation. And it also can be used as a prompt for prompting people to become more aware of their deeper needs in interviews. I'll give an example about that in the next section. So Jenny, thank you. So then the second element, also an element of empathy, is what we call reflective empathy. And this comes very much from the humanist Carl Rogers. He used a lot of reflection as an element of empathy. And what this is it's training one's listening capacities to listen actively and to listen to reflect rather than to react. So when we're interviewing and we're asking a lot of questions, you will usually tend to be listening to react, because you hear something, you immediately want to know more, and you kind of direct it with your own question. With reflection, you actually reflect back what you hear. So you can use parroting, you can use summarizing, and then also reflecting the unsaid. So reflecting back what you observe in terms of the body language, the nonverbal element. So here we would potentially in interviews use reflection as a way of summarizing what you've heard. You would use it to prompt something that sounds, really important to get people to go deeper into their experiences. And then also one uses it in, for example, teams. If you're seeing that, maybe discussions are starting to get quite heated or quite difficult, and you're getting a lot of different perspectives emerging. The reflective empathy or using reflection is a very useful way of presenting diverse views. So you actually reflect back what you hear a person say. And particularly when we have very different cultural understandings and different words can mean different things, reflecting back your understanding is a useful way of demonstrating on the one hand that you understand, but also the person that you're speaking to can say, no, look, you didn't quite get that. It's actually like this. And you keep going until you actually do understand. So I'll give an example of how one can use the reflections and the kinesthetic empathy together. So this was a project we were doing where we're using design thinking approach to design an intervention in a social services non-governmental organization. And in one of the interviews, we noticed, well, someone was describing one of their difficult experiences, but as they did it, they just almost really unconsciously touched their heart. And so in the reflection, we would say, I see that when you describe XYZ, you touch your heart. And this has the effect of the person becoming more aware that they're actually experiencing something in their heart. And it also brings their awareness into that experience, and it encourages them, just by reflecting that back to them, it encourages them to share what is happening in their heart. And so in that way, we were able to actually go deeper into that experience of what they were talking about. Next slide. I was keeping an eye on the time because...
Yes, and I just want to acknowledge that Sasha is back.
Okay.
Ghana's had some real internet troubles nationwide. So welcome back, Sasha. But we'll come back to your point a little bit later about the eldest daughter syndrome and this issue of overextending and not forgetting to come back to yourself. All right. And also welcome to Tsikelelo, who's joined us.
So can I quickly, two more things I'll finish off and then I'll hand back to Sasha. And it's actually quite a useful time to do that. So then we move into imaginative empathy. And here I just want to really iterate. We often speak about stepping into the shoes of another person for empathy. What one is describing there is the imagined self element. So I imagine myself in your situation. I'm stepping into your shoes. But what we actually want to do, and this again is a kind of a training and an orientation, is to imagine the other in their context or in their shoes. So it's not about us in their shoes, it's about them in their shoes. And so we use, as if acting, also really getting a very deep understanding of what those shoes are all about in order to gain that insider view. So an embodied insider view of the other perspective. And this is useful in creating personas, customer journey maps, and other kind of point of view activities. And then just lastly, before we go back to Sasha, kind of last but not least is self-empathy. So that's on the next slide, Jenny. So we actually always start all empathy practice with self-empathy. This is a reflective practice where we bring awareness to our own experience before empathizing. And what we're doing is we identifying our own biases and preconceptions in order that we can create a space in ourselves to be available for the other person. And so it's about carving that inner space. We usually come very noisy inside. We have a lot of stuff going on. We might be busy. We might be anxious about something. We might be tired, whatever it might be. How do we carve an inner space intentionally to be able to be open and present to the other person? We find this incredibly useful in all elements of the whole design thinking process, because we very often are triggered. We have our own, positionality, our own current state, role, power structures, and various things. And if one doesn't actively look at these things, then they can really impact all the empathy that we do. So yeah, maybe with that we go back to Sasha. I think it's a nice point to go back into the elder daughter syndrome.
Thank you so much, Katherine. This is so thought-provoking. Sasha, would you like me to go back to your slide? Or would you like to just speak to it? And you're welcome to keep your video off if it's going to be
just briefly. Yes. Yes.
There we go. Or do we need to look at this?
Awesome. Yes, just here. Awesome. So over here, I just wanted to point out how sort of being an eldest daughter, by reason of your birth position, you're sort of just expected to be a natural caregiver, a natural empathetic person, naturally responsible, always putting people ahead of yourself. And you do this so much for others, and you're expected to do that so much for others that you don't know how to do it for yourself, right? And that's the point that I want to make around the self-empathy and looking at empathy through the lens of the eldest daughter. And on the next slide, where I have the eldest daughter syndrome, it's sort of like the thought about always overextending yourself, sort of stepping into the shoes of others, always putting others first before yourself, that when you're confronted with the same scenarios as others, you do not know how to care for yourself. So a good example I would like to share is like I was doing a research within like some rural areas with some young girls, and they were sharing some really sensitive information around some topics, right? And some of the challenges that they were sharing with me were some challenges that I know of people that are really close to me that have experienced the same situation, right? Or even me myself, I had experienced something very similar. But in that situation, I went over and beyond to see to their well-being, or sort of getting them the right resources beyond just the research, because for me, empathy is beyond just stepping into somebody's shoes and coming back out of it. It's has the responsibility undertone as well. So I was able to get them the necessary support, and like I still follow up with them even up until now. But then when I went back home and I was just like reanalyzing everything from the point of view, and I sort of broke down crying. I didn't know how to sort of console myself. But when I do see it in other people, I can't console myself. So it really takes us back to what Katherine said around starting your research with self-empathy, really bringing yourself to the place where you really understand yourself so that you are in a better position to extend empathy to others as well.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that, Sasha. I'm jumping down again. So do you want to pick up from there then, Katherine?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And thanks very much, Sasha, for sharing that. And I think, it's something that we see with empathy really over and over again, is this where almost what one is picking up and understanding. When you empathize, picking up and understanding in the other person becomes such a real experience for oneself. And very much in the African context, we see that when you're working with people who have had difficult experiences and you are experiencing those difficulties in your own life, how it reinforces your own experiences. And so to be able to learn how to distinguish between one's own experience when the other person's experience is triggering your own, in order that it doesn't create this personal, what we call, one of the kind of counter sides of empathy is what we call personal distress or empathic distress, when you experience the distress that you're observing in the people you're working with, and it becomes your own experience. So what we'd like to do is to really look at the self-empathy as an exercise, but with the context of positionality. So something else that is very relevant when working in our context is, how are the social and political context shaping your own identity? And how does this identity that you have influence your perceptions on the users that you're researching, or, you know, the rest of the world out there? So in design thinking, it's how can we look at our own identity that we've created through our context, through our culture, through perhaps our own personal biography, and how does this, in terms of privilege, but also, you know, the opposite, non-privilege, how does this impact us as design thinkers when we're acting from a particular social position? So that's maybe quite a lot, but what we'd like to do is we'd like to for you to have an open conversation in breakout groups together. So I think we have 11 people. It might be worth breaking into 2 breakout groups, and even if they're quite small, it'll be a useful opportunity to have an in-depth conversation. Jenny, would you give me the next slide, please? So what we'd like you to do is, before you start the conversation in the breakout group, is just take 2 minutes for yourself and to think about a recent project where you were working and where you intended to empathize. So it could be with a user, a group of users, or team members. And things didn't progress quite as planned. So maybe there was some difficulties for yourself or difficulties in the team. So think of, you know, a moment like that, an example. And then to see, did you see any of these potential social identities playing out in this interaction? So we've listed a couple of the social identities that might be carving your identity. So some of them are gender, age, race, religious beliefs, marital status, education. So when you were having those difficulties, did you notice any of these that might have been impacting that experience that you were having? And then once you've come up with an example that you would like to share it in the group, and you might have a little conversation around it together. And we'd like you to each to have a scribe in the group, and for that scribe to gather some details, which we'd like you, or we invite you to write up on the Miro board that we will share in the link, Jenny, I think. And then we will come back into the plenary, and the scribe, if they would very kindly report back for a couple of minutes in the plenary. Anything we want to add? Are there any questions about that? And perhaps also any questions about some of the content that we have shared earlier, if there's anything, you know, related to this exercise that you would like to clarify. Questions to Jenny, Sasha, or myself. No hands. They're all clear. So this exercise is written up on the mirror board, so you can refresh your understanding of it on the mirror board. And yeah, maybe we can stop the slide share and
everybody coming back. I hope the room didn't close abruptly there. Did it?
Yeah, I think we had time.
Yeah, we're fine. We came back voluntarily, most of us.
Okay. The other group's been given a minute to wrap up. You're right there, Kalama. Were you lonely?
No. Yeah, we had them to wrap up.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, from your breakout rooms. We seem to have lost one person. We're 10 now. Who's gone?
Janice, Tando.
Right. Well, let's hear feedback from everyone. We don't have a lot of time left, so I'm respectful of those who do need to go at 1, and I'll need to leave by 1:15. But let's use this time to uncover what's emerged from these groups. Katherine or Sasha, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually was in group 1 and I was nominated to be the scribe anyway. So here I am. So we heard 3 very interesting and quite different experiences. And I would say 2 of them, yeah, there was really an experience where the empathy had worked well and that they wanted to report on that. And then one where the empathy was very difficult. And so from Sune, we heard about a project that she was doing in Langa with girls in the city and not feeling that safe, and how to develop interventions that would help them. And she spoke about this is my interpretation, but how in the project they really created a conducive environment for these girls to feel valued. So bearing in mind that they understood that typically they didn't feel valued, but they made them feel valued, and they also really created an opportunity for the feeling element of what was going on for them to be welcome and to be expressed. And that led to a very satisfactory intervention that worked really well for them. And so I think, the part of empathy where you create a conducive environment for people to feel safe, to feel that they can express themselves, really worked for them. And then Tando spoke about how eye-opening he found using design thinking and empathy mapping, or empathy with their users being athletes. And he described also, by opening up that space to hear about them, how they heard about the complexity of all the different socioeconomic and cultural issues that these athletes are dealing with in the anti-doping issues. And then Janice described an experience of where difficult circumstances or difficult project that she was working with, particularly related to racial issues, and how even creating an intentional empathic space, how they noticed that people's biases and defenses was just so ready to jump up to the fore, and how even creating that empathic intentional space for people to work through issues in the team led to more and more difficulties and challenges because of that very deep judgment kind of response or reaction that came up in people quite habitually. Is there anything any of you wanted to add to that? Great, very interesting conversation and sharing.
Now, breakout room group 2, I was there, but we didn't actually nominate who's going to scribe or report back. But I think everyone was making notes. You got any volunteers? Richard?
I think in Sikalelo said he might do it. Eh?
We had a scribe. Sasha was our scribe. Unfortunately, I can't see the mirror board, so I'll just go off of what I remember hearing in the space. But the common thread was similar to what Martha just spoke on now. It was a thing of how our identities can hinder our ability to empathize, either from us personally as individuals or from the people we are trying to empathize with. So, for example, Sasha shared how her age was a restriction for her to empathize when she was dealing with older people. Whereas the constraint became that because she was so young, the elder people felt that she did not have the maturity that was required for her to be able to understand their issues and actually empathize with those. And then the tactic that worked for her was to make herself seem more matured, to sort of gain their confidence in the work that she was trying to do. So a similar sentiment was also captured by Jenny when she spoke about how being white and working in a predominantly Black rural area made the children that she was trying to work with uncomfortable. And then the trick or the method that she used was to get them acclimatized to who she was as a person, as a white person in that space, as a new phenomenon for the children that she was working with. And then only after employing that were the kids able to relax and become more interactive and engaging with what she was bringing across. So beyond the age and race issue, there was also an issue of how can I put this, process bias or process familiarity, if I should put it, in the sense that once you've done the preliminary work that you believe is necessary for you to be in a position to better serve or service people, it becomes very difficult for you to then be able to empathize with someone who is bringing in fresh ideas post the empathy work that you believe you had done. So this is in particular to a story that Richard shared around our e-scooters at the D school, whereby there was a consultative process that was inviting all different opinions and preferences or suggestions around the types of e-bikes that the school should get, only for them to get to a point whereby once they had purchased and agreed and gotten the scooter, which was a stand-up electronic scooter, there was a later suggestion that some people would have preferred to get a traditional electric motorbike, and that was difficult to consolidate or comprehend when you have already done the empathy work. And then for me, the thing that stood out for me was how my identity or the identity and personal beliefs that I hold could hinder one's ability to empathize properly with the users or the communities that they try to serve, because one assumes that because you are of that community, you therefore understand that community, and then you can skip some of the empathy stages or empathy work that is necessary for you to launch an actual initiative or a program for the benefit of the communities that you are trying to work with. So that was the general theme around the team's difficulties with being able to empathize. I hope I did a good enough job. If there's any additions, feel free to jump in.
Ntsikelelo, you did a wonderful job. Thank you. Without being able to see the mirror board and all the notes.
Yeah.
I want to just add Caroline's experience of working in India, where the topic of mental health was taboo and wasn't easy to speak about with different cultural contexts. Yeah, and I think just to say through all of that, I think parts of our identity are much more obvious, like being the white lady in the room of Black children, my age and my whiteness and the economic status that comes with that. And then other things are more subtle, like Ntsikelele's example. Well, there was lots of sameness. There was a more subtle difference that ended up being quite major. And so, yeah, I think that was wonderful sharing. And perhaps we can, Katherine and Sasha, if all right with you, to just open this and flow into further conversation. If we step back, perhaps I'll ask us to just take a pause for a moment and just sense like everything that's been shared now and what Katherine and Sasha shared in the presentation, and sense what's happening in your body. What thoughts are trickling through your mind. And what is moving at the center of all these stories? What are the commonalities and the central ahas and insights that you take away from this? So I invite anyone to take a moment to share what that insight is. If we can speak concisely, give us a few words or a line. What have you realized today about empathy in design thinking practice?
So can I go first, if you don't mind? So for me, the one thing that came across is that empathy is not easy. Empathy is not straightforward. It requires one to be open to self-introspect and identify their own contribution or role in being unable to empathize adequately, or in being unable to empathize enough. So it's about you personally reflecting on what your role is, what your identity is, and what your and how those are affecting, yes, how those are affecting your ability to connect with the users you are working with.
Thank you, Ntsikelelo, indeed.
I can just maybe add to that. I think one mustn't underestimate how strong your biases are, and no matter, even when you think you're aware of them, they're still there, and they can actually still trip you up.
Thank you, Richard. Janice, would you like to verbalize what you've written in the chat?
Yeah, thanks. I think empathy is really, really complex. And I mean, Richard's point about biases is really important. But one thing, and so I'm speaking not so much in design thinking context, but more around kind of social change work, which design thinking arguably is a form of. But I think what I've come to understand is that if we really commit to it, we can develop the capacity in an ongoing way to become more empathetic. But we've got to commit to that. And we've got to commit to being called in and to work with it. Because working with Katherine, I started working with her about 3 years ago in this work, and still to this day I get tripped up by stuff which echoes what Richard is saying. But I think we can become more empathetic. I think if we really want to, we can really try and do that, and maybe we can do it with a partner who can then help us navigate and help us be more self-critical. So I think it's just in the world today, it's so, so important. So it's really all I want to say.
Thank you, Janice. Yeah, it's ongoing work. Anyone else? Did you come away thinking differently about empathy today and what empathy means after these discussions? I might say, yeah, perhaps I'll be the last one to speak and conclude our conversation today, if there's no one else. Caroline, it looks like you've got something on the tip of your tongue. Is there anything? You have such an amazing project working all over the world with countries, different cultures. And even if you're not coaching design thinking, even in the organizing and communicating with people over email, there's a relationship there that's coming together with different cultures all the time. So
Yeah,
it's a big thing for you, right?
I mean, it goes through the whole process from picking the topics to also finding the right interview partners and to kind of make them feel safe. We have a new project coming up with refugees in Greece. So that's going to be a whole other challenge because not all refugees are the same and they all have different backgrounds. So I think this is definitely something that I take away from this, that we should put more importance on the empathize phase for us as well. And give people also a little bit more time to kind of be aware of their own selves in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kalama, is there anything you would like to share? So you're not just our support today, you're also a design researcher and design thinking teacher yourself.
Yes. So I mean, from all the conversation and the things that have been said, I think one of the things that I'm keep thinking about right now is how, if you want to empathize, not only we have to be self-aware, but we also have to be in a position where in each situations we are in, we have to push to make an effort to actually empathize with people, because we might understand today that we are in a certain positionality, but tomorrow it won't be exactly the same thing. If today we think maybe I'm the youngest one and it's maybe the oldest one don't think I can empathize with them, in another situation we can be the older one that is not empathizing with the others. So there is this aspect of evolution, I would say, of fluidity in empathizing with others. That also comes with being self-aware of who we are, where we are, and what we represent, and how others see us, and how we can impact others. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kalama. Catherine and Sasha, would you like to say share any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I just think for me, it's just always so amazing to have the opportunity to hear different people's experiences like this, and to be able to share them, and particularly in this kind of context. So yeah, I just think really great to share with you all, and also to hear what was brought up in the groups in response to yeah, thinking about the empathy and the positionality. So it feels like a privilege. Thank you.
Janice has shared a file with us. Thank you so much. I'll have a look what that is, and perhaps that's something we can share as a resource in our newsletter. I'll have a look. Sasha, any closing words from you?
Yeah, I'm just really happy about the discussions that went on in the breakout rooms, and really just sharing like what empathy means in our context. I think when I was preparing for this talk, I was looking at it from my point of view. It was really interesting to see how empathy is really playing a part in different contexts that I didn't even think about initially. And I sort of just want to like close with the fact that like to be able to empathize with others, you need to be able to do that for yourself first. And in any situation you're in, you need to be able to check in with yourself first. And I'm really glad that we are doing these conversations to really like talk about like very specific points within the design thinking process that are like really important as well. Yeah, so as we're just practicing, let's just check in with ourselves, and in that case, we can really extend ourselves to be able to help others as well in our practice.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful way to conclude. And I just want to say, yeah, thank you so much to each one of you for being here and contributing to this conversation together today. Your experiences and how it enriches our understanding, and to Katherine and Sasha for your wonderful input and encouraging us into this really important topic. I feel really humbled. You know, we set out this topic and thought, okay, this is important, but now today I feel like actually in awe of the enormity of this topic and how important it is, not just in design thinking, but in our being in teams, our being in our community and with ourselves, and to watch our assumptions, to watch our biases. And I've pictured, you know, if I think about that first image of the two faces overlapping in empathizing, it really feels like a two-way act, that we're not just thinking I'm empathizing with the other, but that there's this dance between two people, or you and many people in a room with all the stakeholders and role players and multiple users in complex situations, that they're looking at us, you know, they're perceiving me. It's not just me that needs to get into their shoes, it's them that needs to allow me in, and how they see me, how I come across, what I look like, what I say, the language I speak, everything that's going to be able to open up or not open up, or to different degrees in different ways. And I think it's something we need to be really patient with and slow with, and take our time. My background is in social anthropology, and there's a great amount of resources there in understanding ethnocentrism and the tools that we use in ethnography to really understand others. So it's a long, slow, respectful process that makes us humble and come in not as the designer that's bringing solutions to other people's problems, but to see the people we're working with as the experts in their own experience, and to come humble. I love that idea of carving out space inside, almost coming empty. And like Ntsikelelo described in our group, that he thought he related to the people in his community, but he had to come anew as a stranger in order to have a fresh perspective and be receptive to understanding what their reality was really about. So I think definitely a deeper topic that we can continue with in future sessions and unpack further and keep talking about. So yeah, thank you so much. And Tune saying how different society would be in 15 years if we could teach this, and teach, yeah, social learning, social communication, intercultural tolerance and respect, yeah, from scratch. Wow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And we'll be sharing the recording of this conversation so others can get FOMO and see what they missed out on and continue this wonderful conversation further. Okay, I would like to quickly just tell you as we close, where is my... Here, I'm going back to the slides quickly, and just to say there's further ways to engage in this community. To participate in future monthly online meetups like this, we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter and join the LinkedIn group. And you can join and connect via a directory of design thinking practitioners. I'm going to share all these links in the chat in a minute. And there's a knowledge hub where we invite you to share resources about design thinking in Africa. We need resources that are relevant to our context and not only from the global north. And yeah, and please take initiative. Get in touch if you'd like to see a next topic or anything you'd like to share or bring or create together. We'll be looking, we're launching a project about looking for cases and examples of design thinking practice in Africa. So look out for news about that. And I'm going to just stop the share so that I can share these links in the chat for those who don't have them. And let me just navigate my way around that. So here they come. And I'm putting them in the chat now. All right, so copy and paste that and please get involved. All right, everybody, let's have a wonderful warm goodbye and thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks,
you so
Jenny,
much.
for holding it. Great. Really good. Thanks to the presenters.
Excellent.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. I'm so glad Ntsikelelo joined. Katherine and Kalama, thank you. Sasha has left. Thank you
Yes.
so much. I thought that was wonderful.
Thank you, Jenny.